I'm here with John Tarahteeff. I'm Amy from Nüart Gallery, and we're here celebrating the opening of his new exhibition at Nüart, and talking about this new body of work. This month, the trick, one of the pieces in the show, is on the cover of American Art Collector, and so I just thought I'd go ahead and read the introduction to that by way of introduction for the show. So John Tarahteeff's paintings take you somewhere new, yet familiar. You don't entirely know where it is, but it feels like you've been there before. His paintings, a 60-40 blend of realism and surrealism, occupy the space between imagination and reality. They evoke the sentiments of being a child, like pretending the blades of grass in a field might transform into reeds in a marsh. I experimented with abstraction in all different styles and eventually settled on something closer to a more realistic representation. But the thing is, from the get-go, I never thought of myself as a realist. I'm always taking liberties, says Tarahteeff. So how, I'm curious about that, because it does, like, this series has a feel of kind of childlike play to me, and it has a real feeling of yeah, like a lot of play in this series, and it feels even more so than other series to me, although your work is always very playful, but this especially, maybe because there's toys. How did that work for you, John?
I think that probably is a big part of what, like, the introduction of actual toys now is sort of taking it further into that. And my sense is that there's probably, like, I'm heading more in that direction. I mean, unless, I don't know, something changes. There's something, maybe it's regression of sorts, but where I'm kind of going more and more into the headspace of sort of making imaginary, remembering playing and stuff like that. And I mean, that's always been a part of the painting thing, but there's something about, becoming an adult and like, oh, but I'm a serious artist. Like, I can't think of painting in that way of like a little kid playing like that. But I'm like, that same impulse, I'm like, I don't see much difference. Like, in a kind of way, there's so much continuity, other than like painting has like a history that I'm familiar with, the canon and whatnot, and all the different, pictorial devices and techniques used. But that aside, the actual spirit to do it and what I'm doing is very playful, like in the same as like with a kid. So
and we should say, when we're talking about toys in this series, there are actually like toy cars, and a lot of them are at the scale or close to the scale of full-sized cars for the figures. So can you tell us a little bit about that move to add them?
Yeah, well, that's the part that particularly this time around, that kind of just overt violation of scale is something that I'm still a bit on the fence about. Like, and I've noticed that, like, when I'm sketching stuff on the computer more and I'm juxtaposing stuff, and there's that scale dissonance, and like figuring out like where I'm okay with that, and trying to figure out why, like, why is it working here but not there? That's part of what makes it interesting, is just kind of like figuring out my own sensibility, like why, like, I don't know why, this works for me here and it doesn't there. Maybe when I figure it out, it won't be interesting anymore. So maybe not figuring it out is part of why I'm doing it. So
we won't push too hard then, because it's working really well. Which was the first piece that got the toy car?
God, that's hard to say. Like, it could. Well, okay, so I did Shielded, and that has a car in it, the Cadillac Eldorado. But and I've done paintings, I think, that I've had cars in the past, and I've used, for all of those, I've generally used like a toy or a replica of sorts, and then just made it to look to scale. And in that Shielded, it was a little toy car too, but it was a real accurate looking toy car, and I painted it to look realistic for the most part. But I guess in the painting behind you, that's where I finally went, well, you know, that car can just like it need there was some interplay with the girl where it really made sense. I'm like, she like did she drive there in the car like when it was a realistic looking car? And I'm like, or maybe this is all like her imagination going on right now. And she's on her own on the edge, and her parents are showing up looking for her on that station wagon coming in. But this is like the adventure in the meanwhile she drove herself out here and da da da. Something like that. It's like her there's something about it being a toy car where it leaves you in that uncertainty. Is this like a real thing, or is this her imagination of what's happening? And so it's that kind of like the magic realism thing you were talking about with that author. Because his I haven't read, because I don't I barely read, but the excerpts I've seen, it has that quality. It's like, am I reading someone's imagination or something? Like how vested in what I'm hearing do I need to get in terms of like it really happened, or is it even like what am I really watching here? Someone's like their dream, or is it real? And I like that a little bit of feeling. So.
Yeah, dreams. We asked a lot of your fans to send us questions, and dreams were a common question. And when I was looking, we were talking about Shielded a second ago with the car, and when I was looking at that one, I kept thinking about kind of the geography of dreams, because it has such a dreamy feeling to me. But almost the thing that makes it feel dreamiest is the fact that I feel like I recognize that spot. It feels like the Golden Gate Bridge, but like downtown's not there. I don't think there's a parking lot right there. And
Yeah.
it's all just a little different. And
yeah, it's like a construct using, like, just like you're saying, it's using the familiar elements of that world, but yet it's just creating a new world with those. And dreams do that a lot, and they even do it like with time. Like even though they'll take something from a certain time, and maybe that world looked like that at a certain time, but then it looked like something else, and it just puts them together and makes a one world out of it that never really existed. Like that's actually more of the Bay Bridge. If anything, that bridge would be the Bay Bridge. But then I made it red, like the Golden Gate Bridge would be, just because formally I preferred red there rather than a gray thing, And yeah, and so the whole, and it has a feeling of the San Francisco thing, kind of, if someone's been there, but it's not really how it looks.
Yeah, it's really satisfying. I mean, because it does have that feeling of dreams. Like I was in my hometown with my brother a couple of years ago, and we just went past this intersection, and it's not something you'd really notice, except it's kind of an odd shape. It's kind of a V-shaped intersection. And I was like, oh, I always dream about this intersection, but like it'll be flooded with water or something. And my brother was like, I do too. Like I really like how geography gets scrambled in dreams, and this has that super satisfying feeling of that.
That story, that what's intriguing about that is that there's a universality to it. That's interesting to me. Like I always think, well, this is my own little private dream. Like I doubt if there's any universality, or I just don't know. But that's neat if someone else is like, for some uncanny reason, like, why am I remembering this? And it's like, yeah, I'm remembering it too. Well, then you kind of wonder, like, what's going on? Like there's like this other layer of reality that's really important, but we just don't notice. We don't notice it in the same kind of way or something. I don't know.
Yeah, they feel so wonderful that way. And the painting Twixt, I feel like it has both of those things so much, both the play and the toys, and that very dreamlike feeling.
That one most closely goes with like a specific aura of a dream world that I have. Like there is a kind of recurrent dream, or like some sort of world that I've tried to keep it like in the sort of fog that it that it kind of is, because I think it's a really good go-to place for more ideas. But that one has that aura of like, I'm like, oh yeah, it's got that feeling of that place, like, and I suspect there'll be more that tap into that world. But um, it's good to hear that like you also recognize that there's something there, or like some like because that's the part that you just never know. It's like, am I just off on my own little,
Well,
so
if you are, keep going there because people are enjoying it quite a bit.
okay.
Whatever that own little world is, it's really, really satisfying. Yeah, I with Twixt, I had almost the feeling of like a Hitchcock movie. And like, but also like children and sleep. And I mean, I probably would, after we hung the show, probably stood in front of it for about an hour staring at it. And since then we've had such wonderful conversations about it, and everybody has, of course, really different interpretations, but it's really fun piece.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed doing it. It went. It's the most, well, yeah, I'd say it's maybe the one that's the most recent. Like sometimes I have a sketch and it stays around for many years, and then I finally do it. Like it finally evolves into a point. That one doesn't go back quite as far. It's like that. The pose of that guy was the sort of initial thing, but then I developed it in the course of this year. So
Mm.
that's kind of like a. So I guess it feels. I don't know what the word, but um it's a nice thing that like my pieces don't have to gestate that long. Like, hey, that's a good signal for the future. Like I can get an idea and then in 6 months later have a painting. I don't have to always wait 5 years for the sketch to finally find out what it's going to be. So
Is it cheating to ask you about the socks? Like, I don't want to ask you about the things because people have such rich personal interpretations. But
well, those look like, so that guy, the feeling like at points I was getting, like he's kind of dorky a little. He's like this older dude, but he like there's something about his pose and everything, how he's carrying on, and this, it's like on the one hand he's this patriarchal figure, but yet he's not acting in a like a real, I don't know, like a real, what, I don't know the word for it, so I better not just float something out there. But he's acting kind of strange for the patriarchal type figure. Let's put it that way. And so but his socks have this tinge of like, really bring him to like the vernacular of just a kind of like everyday man reality. Like I have those socks, I wear those socks. Everyone does gold toe socks or whatever. And it's just like, yeah, this is just some guy. And so it like I don't know, like sometimes that's a case of one of those very specific things. Like sometimes things are stylized and streamlined to make it more not specific. But in that I was just like, no, he's really got to have these socks, like that specific sock, because it just felt like, well, also the gold was just good to have something light there because it was all darks down there, and I needed something to like, be a lighter value to just kind of pop off of it. I'm like, oh, but just in that small way of that little threading through the toe, I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. Just that, because that makes it all the more like you noticed it, right? Like I'm like, even though it's this like little thing that like it shouldn't be a big deal, but in the context, because it's the only light value that's like allowed to sing there, and it's on this very small scale, this little thread, it like becomes so important in the context. Like I'm really noticing this or seeing, and I love things like that when something like is every day and like you don't even pay attention to it because it's just so vernacular, so banal, just the usual blah blah blah. But suddenly in the context, you're like noticing it now, because it's just like it's everything else has been like pared down, like almost a stage for this boring thing to like sing on. And I like those kinds of incidents. So
And how funny, oh, sorry. How funny that, oh, I think I'm hearing my voice echo back. There we go. It's so funny that, you know, in some places you're taking reality and like making it more unreal, like the figure on the motorcycle, the toy, or maybe he's just wearing pink. And he has a pink motorcycle, it could be, but this little unreality versus the socks bring you back to something kind of, I mean, the fact that it's so everyday makes it even odder in a way. Like, you know, that kind of brings the reality in, whereas other things take you out of the reality, or like, you know, break the reality a little bit.
Yeah, well, like that motorcycle you're remarking it, that's an actual like toy that looks exactly like that. So it was painted with total fidelity to how that specific toy really looks. And so, but someone who's never seen that specific toy doesn't know that. It's not like with the socks, like for sure that toy is even less, you know, well known or whatever. It's not in the vernacular. So,
Yeah.
but the point is like that, like I could have painted that to look like a real motorcycle, but those particular colors were useful. The how it looked was more useful that it be a toy, but also um, there's that's part of the thing that I'm playing with that's really interesting with for me right now is that you know, like you can see on that toy, if you look up close, you can see it's a toy because you can tell it was made from a plastic mold. There's like a seam going down in one place. Like if you really, but there's something about that because ultimately a painting is always a representation. I mean, obviously it's two-dimensional, so it's not a real thing. But even if it's painted photo real, like there's all these liberties and decisions made, and so it's like that tension between, well, if I paint the toy totally realistic, I'm in a way being more realistic in this one specific area because the toy really looked like that. But then yet the toy itself is an artificial of something. So uh, there, like I'll paint one element like a cloud in that other painting, and I paint it perfectly round or you know in a lip shape, and you're like, oh well, that's totally not real. But you don't know if it was the origin was like a real cloud, and then I just streamlined it down so it would be this perfect shape, like in a modernist painting or something. So I don't know. I always find it's just a hard concept to articulate, like to give words to. But there's this interesting tension, how you know, uh, like we, like you could make a so-called realist painting, go plain air paint and paints a scene, and you're stylizing it a lot, but it was actually based on reality. And then you could just someone could make a diorama of nature of a natural scene, and then you could paint it totally way more realistically than that plain air painter painted the other one because he like changed the shapes of the trees and made them lollipop trees or whatever slightly. But now you're painting like in a like photo real kind of way this like diorama. It's like who's more of a realist, the guy who painted this fake version of reality but totally realistically, or the guy who kind of painted reality kind of with these liberties of stylization. So I like that, you know, we don't have a good, like a good, I don't feel like when people throw around the term realism or this is surreal or something, we don't have a good, like, how do you resolve that issue there? Like, I feel like calling someone a realist or surreal, like it doesn't totally make sense in light of that idea there. Like, uh,
That's a really,
I've had
that's
a
a
hard
really
time.
fun distinction. Yeah, that's really fun thinking of it that way. There was one other question, and I told Wes we were going to keep this short, but Jennifer wrote in wondering about, well, she wanted to know both shadow and gesture, but maybe we could talk about the piece Frolic in terms of both shadow and gesture for Jennifer.
Okay, shadow gesture. Well,
Shadow and gesture.
okay, I haven't thought of it in those terms, but like that piece started with, that was one of those that started from a sketch that was way old. That pose, that gesture, I guess, of her posing and leaning back and everything. And I tried it in a lot of different arrangements. And then over the years, it just evolved into this thing with the dog. Like there was something about the flow of her pose there and kind of arching back, like that motion needed to continue in the whatever world, like whatever that energy was, need to kind of like come back around. So the dogs sort of like brought that movement around. Like there's the one dog on the right, and then the dog that, like, it kind of created this round movement going across her and then coming down the dogs, and kind of just this circular thing. As far as shadows, I mean, that one was painted in the kind of way of just, you pick a light source. I forget where. I think the light source is like from here or something, and so once I did that, and I imagined this thing is almost like a sculpture, this frozen moment of her barking and the dogs and everything, and then it's just figuring out how the shadows would be cast if these things were really there. So that's where the just sort of technical stuff comes in. It's like, okay, well, there's just, because I don't use references. There were no dogs, there was no actual figure or anything, so it's just figuring out where the shadows would go. I mean, sometimes you take liberties with those things because, oh well, just because realistically there would be a shadow here, it's not going to look good formally, because now there's this dark space and I don't need a dark space there. I need to fudge it a little. So there's constantly that going on where you're fudging shadows and stuff, but I want to do it in a way that's like, you don't notice that. You just go, oh yeah, okay, there's a woman here and she's casting a shadow, and you just believe that's kind of a space you could believe is real, even though I might have taken liberties just so it looks right, like there's formal balance and stuff. So.
There's now, I mean, now that you say it, the movement of energy with the dogs, totally see it. Like you can see how like their gesture continues up, and yeah, it creates a circulation of their energy. We're going to get kicked off Zoom here soon, but can you say a little bit about the red dogs? Because part of me has wondered almost if they're another kind of toy, like they almost feel like dogs.
They're not painted. They're very stylized for sure. And it's funny, like as I was working on them at some point, I got hints of, and this has happened with some of my creatures before, my dogs and whatnot. I got a hint of that Maurice Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are. Like as I was painting them, I was getting a little of that vibe, those creatures, like these guys could exist in his world, like of his stuff. That happens a lot in my work. Like there'll be some reference, something that I'll, think of, and I mean, there's so much that you don't know where it comes from, right? Like, and then you just start doing something, and you go, oh, that kind of reminds me of that. But it's like when I grew up, that book was around, and cartoons were around, all these things, the context, and it just informs you. You start to go, I bet I just even liked that because I saw that before, that I even thought that I could do that thing because someone else kind of did it, and but a lot of times you don't see that till you're done, or you pull back or years later and you start seeing, like even that one with the we were talking about earlier with the woman and the little boy, and the bird and the egg, and someone said, like when I was looking at it today, I was like, God, I'm getting a little Diego Rivera vibe off of that woman, and so it's just it's weird, like all that whatever's in your head, it's just kind of getting joined up with actual real experiences, personal experience, and it just becomes this melting pot of stuff. So
it's really cool. Someone sent us something that John painted years ago, and it feels different. Like it feels different than where your work is now. It does feel kind of Diego Rivera. Yeah. Well, okay, John Tarahteeff. Thank you so much for this beautiful show. It's gorgeous, and people are having so much fun with it. Sorry, got the satellite. There's a, there's a, gosh, I mean, the conversations we've been having about this work are just so much fun, and everybody who walks in are like, wow, this is amazing. So it's getting a really wonderful reception. And for those of you who are in Santa Fe, do come see it because it's a fantastic show. And thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
Like I barely get out, so I should talk, but like seeing the paintings in person does make a difference. Because before this, I looked at the pieces, images I have, and I'm like, wow, it does make like, I know they look different. Like, and whenever I take pictures and I'm looking at the real thing on the easel and the painting, and it's just like, there is something about seeing an actual work that is just, it's much different. The colors, the scale stuff. So yeah, it'd be great if people saw.
Yeah, there's a real life to it in person.